Telling a story. Story archetypes. Data visualizations, the typical vehicle through which data is conveyed to the public, aren't necessarily accurate, accessible, or appropriate within their contexts. A data visualization calls attention to a specific pattern or story within a dataset, illustrating one of many possible interpretations. A visualization cannot communicate the full complexity of a dataset. This raises the issue of the questions we ask of data. Questions that inevitably will involve a degree of bias, at least to some extent. Creating and understanding data visualizations requires graphicacy. According to MIT, graphicacy is the ability to understand and present information in the form of sketches, photographs, diagrams, maps, plans, charts, graphs, and other non-textual two-dimensional formats. It is a complementary skill that is necessary for the effective communication of data-derived information. Also, according to MIT, beyond graphicacy, understanding different languages' cultural appropriateness in terms of symbols, visuals, and media is also necessary. They say that at present, our understanding of such languages is sparse. But my suspicion is that if you were to communicate to each other, you'd find a way to hit the right tone. Furthermore, the bias in visualizations is often deliberate. A highly data-literate person or public will understand not only how to interpret data visualizations, but also how to assess the reliability and objectivity of the sources. What kind of stories can be told with data? This list is useful scaffolding for thinking about the kinds of stories you can find to tell. It isn't a complete list by any means, but it is useful to think through as you're digging into data. The following are concrete examples of each. For this, we'll revisit the public trees dataset that we saw in our workshop a few weeks back. We used it to try to identify stories to tell. At the time, we came up with some ideas, but now we'll use this framework to better identify stories to tell about the trees. Remember that this dataset contains information on whether the trees are on the road or off the road, which borough they are located in, which side of the street, the civic number of the address of the tree that the tree faces, the tree's dataset identification number, the location of the tree, which plot it's on, X and Y coordinates, the tree cultivar acronym and the species in Latin, French, and English, trunk diameter, date of last reading, the property it's on, location, park index number if applicable, and longitude and latitude. Changes over time. Humans experience the world through time, so before and after stories are naturally relatable. This dot map shows the trees as listed on the database in a part of Point St. Charles. Each dot is one tree, colored based on its species. We can see that Rue Charon stands out for having 2 rows of ash trees, which are also known as skyline honey locust ashes. And then Rue Bourgeois has 2 rows of Colorado spruce trees, and then Sainte Madeleine has 1 row of skyline honey locust trees, faced by a row of Colorado spruce. And then Rue de la Congrégation has 2 rows of red ash trees, and then Sébastopol has no trees. When you look at the rest of the city, there isn't the same pattern of genus diversity. So why was this part of Point St. Charles planted this way back in the early to mid-1990s? Sometimes it's the odd outlier that creates the interesting factoid, and it's the one to dig into for a story. We often try to start examining data by looking at it in aggregate. Don't forget, sometimes though, that the solitary story of one data point can be the most compelling. The data says that there's a rare tree called the anachronist Kentucky coffee tree in a sidewalk on Rue de la Congrégation in Point St. Charles. What's the story here? Surprising connections. People often look for connections between different parts of data. In statistics, these are called correlations. We've talked about this before. And as we can see in this particular example, we need to remember that correlation does not mean causation. But still, here's a chart of fruit trees in Montreal. If you lived in Rosemont Petite Patrie, you would have a 100% chance of having a fruit tree in your neighborhood. If you live outside of Rosemont Petite Patrie, you have a 100% chance of not having fruit trees in your neighborhood. There's another chart of recorded bedbug infestations since 2011. The only place with more bedbugs than Rosemont is Ville-Marie. This makes me wonder what kind of trees they've got in Ville-Marie. Personal experiences. Another type of story involves personal experiences. Here I've zeroed in on what's probably the ugliest, scariest part of Montreal, located just south of the Dorval Airport and north of the rail yard. Someone planted 2 lone public trees, I suppose so that one could keep the other company. Also, weirdly, these are Russian olive trees. So many questions. Why put them there? Do they produce olives? Does someone harvest them? What's that strange contraption with MIDI satellite dishes and wires? This is odd. There's a personal story here, but I don't know if we want to know about it. The last type of story is comparison. The idea here is to compare one slice of data with another slice. The blue bars here represent the tree count in the neighborhood, and the red represents population. According to this graph, which neighborhoods have much more people than trees? Here, if you said Mercier, Côte-des-Neiges, and Villeray, you would be correct. Sometimes we can compare a slice with a slice with a slice. Here, the purple represents average household income before taxes in 2016. Here we conclude that maybe people with less resources end up in places with less green space. We can't necessarily conclude that places with higher income get more trees, because there are higher income places with less trees per person than lower income places. This was a brief overview of the 5 archetypes of data stories. Changes over time, interesting factoids, surprising connections, personal experiences, and revealing comparisons. Finding the right archetype goes a long way towards creating a compelling data story.